Would you like to introduce yourself, Angelo, and then I'll introduce myself?
Absolutely. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining for today's webinar. I'm Angelo. I'm here the technical account manager at Divio. I've been working at Divio for quite some time already, so I know the products we offer quite well. I'll be assisting you today on answering questions that arise. So if you have during the webinar any questions to Daniella or about the topics we are covering, feel free to use the Q&A box that you have on top of your application. There you can ask any questions that you would like. And you can also use the chat functionality if you would like to ask something directly in there, and I'll be providing answers throughout the 45-minute session that Daniella will present. And from here, I'll just let him introduce himself to you guys.
Okay, thank you, Angelo. I'm Daniella. I've been with Divio for 4.5 years now. I'm a Python Django developer, and I'm one of the Django core developers. So I'm a member of the Django project. I've also been involved with our platform and with Django CMS, our open source content management system, for several years. So I have a certain technical understanding of the system, but also I'm very interested in being able to make it easy for other people to use and to employ all of these things in their own projects, whether it's our commercial platform or our open source projects. So the focus of today's session is going to be showing you what's involved in taking a project live, and then what you can do once you have a project live, because deployment isn't just about getting a project up, it's also about keeping it running with the required level of resources and so on, so that a site that, for example, has a very high level of traffic or a very complex database or very demanding users might need a different kind of deployment from one that's a very simple personal site. So I'll spend a bit of time showing you how we manage that on the platform. But I think probably the best thing to do is for me simply to get started, to dive straight in with the project that we'll be working with in this session. And as we go along, you may well have some questions. So I encourage you just to write them down and send them to Angelo, and we can tackle those all at the end of the session. If something comes up that Angelo feels is really urgent and that we should discuss right at that moment, then he'll say so. But mostly we can save them till the end. Now, we're doing all of this live, so there are no safety nets, and there's nothing pre-built or scripted here. So you'll be seeing it actually happen, a real person doing it as we go along. So let me share my screen with you so that you can see what I am doing. Angelo, do I have, oh yes, here, sorry, it's interface. Here we are.
Correct.
Okay, so I hope you can all now see my desktop clearly enough to read what's going on there. Angelo, let me know if there are any troubles with that, of course.
All good.
So this is the website that we want to work with right now. This is running right here on my own computer, and it's running in Django CMS. Let me just show you the terminal. Here's the terminal where it's running in the terminal. It's an ordinary Django project. We have a few pages on this site. It's a site for a fictional company that gathers opinions. So everybody's got opinions, and we can choose things like, what's your favorite web browser? Well, I still remember the days of Netscape Navigator because I'm quite old, and it will count the votes. And we have lots of different opinion polls there. We can even ask people their opinion on which future opinion polls they'd like to have. And this is the simple project that we're going to now put onto the Divio Cloud platform. So let me very briefly show you what's in this project. I hope this text is large enough for you to see. It's a standard Django project. We have some media in there. We have we had a database file that we loaded the project from. We've got some static files, templates, a settings file that is probably familiar to you if you've used Django, and some requirements that define the project. So there's nothing at all out of the ordinary there. So what we're going to do now is take this little project, which is running, it could be running anywhere on some kind of Django hosting service, and we're going to bring this onto the Divio Cloud platform and then show you what you can do with it as somebody who's responsible for project deployment and project management. This is my Divio Cloud Control Panel. Now I've got, these are my organizations that I'm a member of, so this is something very useful for you, if, especially if you're an agency, for example, then you might have an organization to represent the different clients that you have. So I'm going to put this in my video seminars organization. I don't have anything in there yet, but it's going to be time to create a new project. And we'll call this seminar, and today is, I forget the date, it's the 11th September. And we have some choices here about the kind of project that we're going to create. So for example, you might start with a self-service project. This is one of our more budget price projects, and then later decide to move it to what we call our managed cloud, where you get more support and more guarantees and response times and so on. We have different regions that we can install it in, different versions of Python. We'll stick with Python 3 because that's the latest. And I want to base this on Django CMS because that's what the original project is based on. So let's create that. So the project is now being set up on our control panel. And this is doing the things that if you have somebody who works in DevOps for you, this is the kind of thing that they'd be doing, except now it's happening at the click of a button. You can see that it's provisioning the project right now. You'll see that we've got a count here of Git commits, and these are going to increment as we sit here. You're probably familiar with Git. All our projects are versioned in Git, and that makes it very easy for developers to work with the projects, to do things like clone the projects for another user, because often you'll work with projects that have a very similar kind of basis. You'll have your own ways of working. You'll want to replicate those, so you're not reinventing the wheel every time. It makes it easier for people to collaborate. It allows you to, for example, to roll back to previous versions of a project, should you need to. And generally, you'll find that a version control system is the way most people will work these days, because it's very powerful and gives you a lot more security and stability in your project management. So this is nearly done now. So this is doing things as well as setting up things like our database, our connection to the web server, our connection to the media server. It's also automatically configuring the project's code. That's what's been going on in Git. As you can see, it's actually finished provisioning it now. And I can show you what some of that means. So if we go to add-ons, add-ons are our packaging system for Python Django packages. It's a kind of overlay on the packaging systems that you're already familiar with if you use things like pip. So this is a list of what's already been installed in the project as standard. And we've got Django, we've got Django CMS. I should point out that Aldrin Django is not a different version of Django. It's not a fork of Django. It is Django, but it's got our little wrapper around it that allows it to configure itself in our projects. This is how it was able to be, why our project is now ready to deploy, even though I haven't had to do any work to do that myself. There is one thing I want to do, though. in this project, I want to add another component because my original project over here is based on Bootstrap 4. And I want to install our Bootstrap 4 add-on. So I'm just going to install that now. And check the version, it's fine, and install that. So give it a second. When we go back now to the dashboard, you'll see that there are a couple new commits, and those commits are represented. Here we've got the activity stream that tells you what people have been doing. Here you can see that I installed 14 seconds ago that add-on, and if we have a look at the dashboard, we can even have access to our history there. We can see what activities took place when I installed that add-on. So you have a lot of information about the project and what's going on. So that project is actually completely ready to deploy now on the server. Although I'm not going to hold on for doing that just yet, because what I want to do first is very briefly get my original project here into this new Divio project. And I'll do that working locally on my own computer. So we'll come back to some of these menu items in a moment, but let's go to local development first. So we have a local development environment. And just as our cloud hosting environment is based on Docker, which allows us to have a stage environment and a live environment that are almost exact replicas of each other, so that you know if something works on stage that it will work on live, we also have a local environment. And the local environment is also based on Docker, and that means that I can develop with confidence locally in the same kind of environment that will be used on the cloud. So that's very powerful for developers and gives you a lot of confidence when you're working. So let me open a new tab here. And I'm going to simply paste in that command that I copied from here. This is going to run the Divio command. Let me make that a little bit larger for you. Run the Divio command to set up this project locally. And let's paste that in there and start that off. Now, what's taking place here is what we call the project build process. First of all, it clones the Git repository, and then it runs through some instructions using Docker to set it all up. And what's happening right here now on my computer is pretty much exactly the same thing that would happen on the cloud when you deploy a project. It gets all the project code. It wires up things like the web server, the database. You can see it starting the database now. It'll prepare the media files so that they can be served as part of the project. And what I'll have here in just a few seconds more is the same thing that would be deployed on the cloud as soon as I hit deploy, either for the test server or later when we're ready to go live on the live server. I'm not going to do this just yet, just because I want to concentrate on what's happening here. Here we are, the database is being migrated. These are the migrations, it's building the tables in the database. Again, you're probably familiar with some of these things if you've used Django before. And there we are, we've got to the end of the migration process. Putting down the media files, there are media files to put down, and it's ready to go. So let's go into the directory it's created, which is September. And if I now run Divio project up, I could also run a Docker compose up command. It's the same thing. This will start the project up, and let's give it a moment, and it will launch my web browser. And here we are in that project. It's running locally on port 8000, and I'll just add myself as a admin user to it, sign in. We have a single sign-on, which works both locally and on the cloud. And here's my content management system. It's completely empty, as you can see there. It's just asking me to create a page. Now, I'm not going to create any content in it here, so I don't need to bother about that because I'm going to import it from the existing site. So let's have a look at our two projects and make sure that they are ready to have the data from this one go into this empty one. Okay, so first of all, I have a little bit of limited screen real estate here, so let's squeeze things together so you can see where they are. Let me go back to the terminal there, and I'm going to open the project, the Divio Cloud project here. Oh, and by the way, I should say, again here, it's a pretty standard Django project. There are a few things in there that are specific to our platform, but the whole way our platform is engineered and designed is so that you're not locked into our platform. You don't have to do things in a special way for our platform. You can just develop your applications for your project in the usual way and not worry about doing things our way. We allow you to do things in good practice ways, and then we hope, of course, you won't leave us, but should you ever need to, it's actually quite easy to. We don't engineer things so that you're stuck in our platform. So let's have a look at, where's the one gone? Okay, one thing I know I need to do is to get some of the custom applications that are in my original project that I'm using for the opinion polls into the new project, which doesn't have any of that functionality there. So one of those applications is something that we'll simply get from GitHub. So I'm just going to, I've got that, and I'm going to, so this is a, you can go and look at this yourself. It's a repository on GitHub, and this is where we have the Django polls application that we're going to need. So I'm going to add that into the requirements. Also, we've got another little application here that's part of the project code, and this application helps integrate the polls application with Django CMS. So that's something that I'm simply going to pick up and copy over to my new project. So I'm just dropping that into there. I'd better copy over the templates that I use in the original project because they will help set up the page structure. So let's copy those in. Yep. And the static files that contain things like my CSS and JavaScript, my styling, I'll need those. So let's put those in there. So those are copied over. And the media, this is user uploaded files such as images that people might, your site administrators might upload. So we need to put those, try again. We need to put those into the appropriate place too. So those components are all in there. And I think that's everything I need. So what I need now to do, because we're using Docker and we've got some we've got one new component here. What I need to do is to run a Docker build command. And this will do the same thing that the deployment does when it's running. And this is very important because it's one of the things that helps ensure that when you deploy a site, you get the same thing every time. So if you're used to developing Django projects locally, you might do things very incrementally. And that's fine, but when you deploy, you've got to do everything the same way every single time. And you don't always have that history of your working. So we can run the build command, and instead of remembering all the things that I've done, we will use things like our Docker file that contains all the instructions for building the site in the same way time after time. So that's built. I mustn't forget, I have to add a couple of items into the settings file because we've got a couple of applications that are not in our settings file. Now, some of you will notice that this settings file is a little bit different from a standard Django settings file. That's a slightly deceptive appearance. In fact, it's not that different at all. But if you've got any questions about that, just make a note for Angelo and I'll explain to you why. Although it looks a little bit different, it's not really that different at all. But you don't need to worry about that too much. So I'm not going to dwell on it now, but I will, of course, answer any questions about that. And what I need to do now is migrate the database because I've got some new applications in there. So let me do that. So I need to do it inside the Docker container. Whereas in this project over here, the one that I started with, this is all running on my own machine. For the Divio project, it has to be run inside a Docker container because that's the way that we ensure that we have this repeatable, portable, scalable architecture. So Docker compose run web. That means that I'm going to run the web container, and inside the web container, I'm going to run the Django command manage.py. Great. Okay. So instead of running this locally, I run it in this virtual system that's running inside Docker. Okay, two migrations needed to be run. We're nearly there. We've got the database set up, but of course the database is still perfectly empty because we haven't put anything in it. So there's one more thing to do, and we'll just, sorry, wrong one. We've got the, this is a dump of the database in JSON. So I'm just going to copy that over here to my, and now I am going to load that in. So again, it's a Docker command. Docker compose run --web, and this time the command is manage.py load data, and it's database.json. So this is a standard Django command to load save content from the database. And what have I missed there? Oh, of course I've got. You see, I'm not so smart that I can type and think at the same time. I can do one or the other. I just got the command a little bit wrong. This is going to install 658 fixtures, I think, if I remember correctly. So it takes a few moments. 685, not 600. And let's take the project up. Docker compose up. Moments starting. Okay, and the server is running, and this will now be available over here if I just refresh that. And there we are. So now this one is the Divio Cloud project. It's got all the same content that the it's got all the same content that the original had. So we can, if you want to check the numbers, you'll see that they're exactly the same. But it's now ready in our platform. So all I need to do now is push this back to the cloud because I don't want to work on it anymore locally, and let's get it up on the cloud. So I'll just stop that from running, and I'll do various things. So I mentioned that the project is handled in Git. So let's have a look and see what our Git status is. We've got lots of things here that have changed because of the work that I've done. So I'm going to add all those changes. Git add. So we want to add the requirements, we want the settings, Of course, we want all the, of course, we want all the static files and the templates and that. Oh, and the polls integration. So let me check that. Let's do it. That looks good. Yes, all the changes are up there, except those two, which we don't need to worry about. So I will git commit. You don't need to worry too much about the these git commands that I'm using. I'll explain something about why you don't need to know this at all afterwards. So Angelo, perhaps you'll remind me to mention the Divio app as well as the command line.
I'll gladly do.
Project. And then I am now going to push that to the Divio server. And let's look at this over here. You'll see that this is updated in a moment because I've just pushed some more commits to the I've got to do a git pull first, sorry. Let's do a git pull. And now let's do the git push. You'll see that that number should update because I've pushed some more commits to the server from my local computer. There we are, there's that new commit. And now we really are ready to deploy. Actually, let's do one more thing first. Let me do the push the database because I've got the database locally. Divio project push DB. So the database is going to be sent up to the cloud. And then I'll do the same thing with the media files. Oh, let's try again. Sometimes you get a temporary error. Let's do the project stop just in case this. Okay, that's work. Oh no. Okay. Divio project push media. We'll push up the media files. Yes, I'll do that. And I am not quite sure why the database is refusing to push itself up. Let's have a look at this. Push. There you are. I think it's going to work this time. This does happen sometimes. It's a little glitch on my system. But anyway, the database is going to be up there in a moment. If we look back at the control panel, we'll see that that things are happening. That it's restoring the database from the content that I've pushed up. And I should check that the media files have also gone up. Yes, they are. So as soon as this database is finished going up, I'm going to, I'll do it now. I'm going to deploy this project here. And off we go. So if you remember when we were looking at my local display here, you saw lots of things happening here as it was building the project. And that's what's happening now, but on the cloud. So if you look at the log of what's happening here, you'll see something that looks pretty much exactly the same as that. So it's building the Docker image now, and it's going to, inside the Docker image, it's going to start up the connection, the application connected to the database, migrate the database, wire up the this instance of the project to the load balancers and application runners, the database, the media servers, and it normally takes about 1.5 minutes, depending on how much load there is on our platform to complete the there you are, filling the database migrations. It normally takes about 1.5 minutes, depending on how much load there is on our platform. It looks like it might be a little bit faster this time. Oh, there we are. Okay, so it's actually ready, and I can now open the database, open the project on the cloud. I can sign in with our single sign-on. And here on the cloud is the project ready for us to use on our stage server. Now it's only visible to those of us who have access to the stage server. So what I can do is give you access to the, let's share this with you in the chat. If I can find the chat. I hope you can all see this. This is a special sharing link. So if you click on that, you should now be able to get into the site and vote on some of the opinion polls. You can tell us whether you prefer Netscape Navigator or Mosaic, for example, and have a little explore of the site yourself. You can't log into it like I can. Sorry, not wrong place. You can't log into it like I can because it's my site. But if you were my client, for example, and I were building the site for you, when it's ready for you to see it, I might share a link like this with you for you to explore the work that I've done. So what we now have is a project that is on the web that people can access if I want them to. And what I need to do now is, as a site owner, is make sure that it's ready for it to go live. So, of course, you, as a developer, you have a checklist. You want your client to check it, as I've asked you to check it now. Oh, someone's had a CSRF issue.
Correct, yeah.
Is that everyone having that?
Same for me, yes.
Oh, okay.
You're submitting the poll, basically.
Ah, okay. Okay, I'll have to, that's probably just submitting the poll, but not in other things.
It appears so, yes.
Yeah, okay. I'll have to, thank you. Okay, we'll have to check that out. Well, oh, there you are. After refreshing, it's working fine. We'll have to have a look at that. But that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of testing that you'd have to do when really going live with a project. That's actually probably a Django programming error on my side because I've only actually tested this locally. So as well as handing it to your client to look at, you'd have to check various things. So, for example, we can manage some configuration for the project here in the control panel. For example, we can set whether we want to have the project available in other languages. You can also do this through the project settings, but sometimes when you're a project manager but not a developer, you might prefer to do this through the control panel. So, for example, you might want to be able to, you want the project to be available in Arabic too. If you want to do things like duplicate a standard project that you work with, these are options that you have here as well. It might be that I work in a team and I might want to ensure that another colleague has access to the project. So in this video seminars organization, I've got here's the project, sorry, I've got some collaborators, so I can choose someone else on the team. I send this to my colleague, enter his Jonathan's email address. I won't actually do it now, you don't need to see it. And he'll get an invitation, and then he will have access to the project as a developer as well, and I can control his access. It might be that I've got a freelancer who's going to do some content or design work, so I could add my freelancer as a collaborator, and they'll have access for as long as they need to have access, and then afterwards I can rescind their access so that they no longer have, they can no longer do that. So this is very useful when you're working not just in teams, but also across teams. We've got 3 environments for the project. We've got the test environment, we've got the live environment, which we haven't set up yet, and we've also got the local environment. Of course, you don't see the local environment here on the cloud, but each of these environments can have their own environment variables. So for example, let's say that you've got a service that handles bulk mail for you, then probably you'd have a key that you'd need to provide to it, or maybe a mapping service. they would typically ask you to have a key, and you could manage these through your environment variables. You have different ones for each test and live environment, even though the project itself is exactly the same. When we go live, we're not going to do this right now, we'd have to add a domain. So if I wanted to serve this under a real domain, not just one of our fixed Divio Cloud domains, I will add that into the control panel here. I'd set up the domain name. It'll tell me the settings that I have to enter on my DNS service. And once I do go live with the project with the domain, it'll also automatically do things like set up certificates and our Cloudflare and our CDN and so on. So it takes care of all those things for you. If I had some cron jobs, some regular things that needed to be run on a regular basis, then depending on the project plan, I could enable those as well. So there are a lot of things that a project manager can manage from here without being a developer. So I've now done everything that I need to do to get the project ready to deploy on live. And when I'm ready to do that, all I need to do is hit deploy. At the moment, I'm not going to deploy it on the, I can deploy it on the, on a free plan or any plan I like. And let's give it a moment. There we are. It's now going live. I haven't actually wired it up with a domain because this is just for our demo, but I could do. And when this is live, everybody will be able to access the project, not just the people that I gave the link with the access token to. So that will be ready for everyone to see. Later, when as my project starts to grow, I might decide, well, I need to make sure that it has enough resources allocated to it. So this is running on what we call the personal subscription. You can see that it's got the 256 megabytes of RAM, which I should point out might seem like not very much, but because this is using Docker, every little bit of that RAM is dedicated to the application. So in a Docker environment, you need much less RAM than you would if you were running a virtual server, for example, because you don't have any of the operating system overheads to deal with. We've got one instance here, and what we mean by that is we've got one web container serving this, and that will be plenty for a personal site. But if I'm getting thousands of requests a minute or even thousands of requests a second, then I might like to have multiple instances serving the site. And because of Docker, it's extremely easy for us to do that. We can just simply scale the number of web containers, and they will all be identical using the same database and handling these requests that come in for the website. And we've got our configuration for the amount of disk space and transfer that we want to set up. And we can change those. So for example, if you go to a professional plan, then you get twice the number of instances, you get much more RAM. And eventually, if you go onto one of our business plans, for example, you'll get a lot more resources, and you'll also get a lot more in the way of support from us. And as I said, these things can scale. They can scale automatically to cope with very sudden peaks in demand. So whatever the world has to throw at your website, if you get onto the front page of the New York Times website, you don't have to worry about it, because our platform is designed to make sure that it can match demand. And even if you're on a lower plan and then you find that your website is suddenly receiving very high levels of attention, we operate what we call soft limits, so that we don't suddenly say, okay, you've exceeded your limits, your site's not going to work anymore. That never happens. What will happen is that we will keep your site running and let you know that perhaps you should think about upgrading your plan, because it's now consuming more resources because of the demand. You'd want to upgrade. Oh, I forgot to do one thing. I deployed the live site, but I didn't actually put the database onto the live site. So the live site is empty. So I can very quickly, probably the easiest way for me to do that is I can do, remember I did this a few minutes ago, I can just do Divio project push DB and push that to the live site. So yes. And I better do Divio project push media live. I could also have done this through the control panel, so you can run a deployment from one environment to the other. Oh, I need to wait a minute because it's deploying. But when you deploy, you can also have the option to deploy and copy all the site data. So here we are. We could copy it. We could have copied the def data from the test and deployed. And let's go to the. There we are. This is the live site now. Let's refresh that. And so that's now live for everyone to see. The only thing we haven't done is wire up a custom domain name to that. Let me just send that to you. It's just the same site as before, but this time it's running in the live environment rather than the test environment. So I've got my site live, and maybe it's time for me to do a little bit more development work on it. Well, what I would do is I go back to my local development environment. I've got all the material here, so I do my development work here. Then I push it to the test server, deploy it on the test server, and I and my colleagues and my clients would test it and check it there, maybe build some content there. And then we're finally ready. We would go to the control panel and make sure that we deploy the latest things from the test server onto the live server when they're ready. So that's the complete life cycle. And I've concentrated a little bit on some of the things that you would do in the control panel rather than locally. But I'm going to stop talking now because I've been talking at you for about 40 minutes, and I think that's enough of me now. So maybe it's interesting to hear some of your questions, and Angela and I will be very happy to answer those for you.
Great. Thank you very much then for all the questions via the chat. That was we saw very, very nice participation. So really a great thanks to all of you. Also to you, Daniela, thank you very much for that very good presentation.
Thank you all for your, thank you all very much for your time and attention. Thank you, much appreciated.
Then we'll wish you all a very, very nice day. If you have any questions, you will get a follow-up email from us outlining some of the links. Later on, maybe also give you access to the webinar to view later again. And again, thank you very much. Have a really nice evening and see you next time.
Yep. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye. Thanks, Angelo.